Okay, so let's talk about how to apply these questions to your actual essay. So if you're looking at the question, what do you know about the person's history? Okay, so that will give you a sense of what the person might know, what kind of information they have. Because when you know about their history, you know about places they've been, ideas they might know, people they might know. You'll know where they're from because that's what history is. So when you go to apply it to your essay, say you were right, if the subject was we don't talk about Bruno, and the audience was you as an English class, I can think of, when I gather my data about you, I can think about a couple things. One, the majority of my students in our class are under 25 years old. And they're primarily local. In other words, not everybody is under 25 and not everybody is from the Southwest, but the majority of people are. So if I'm targeting the entire group, I have to target everybody. So if I'm writing my attention getter, my first problem is that I am new to the area. I know very little about the Southwest. So when it comes to referring to places, ideas, and people, I'd have no idea what I'm talking about. So if you don't know what something is, don't try to fake it. Just go with what you do know. So I do know what it's like to be under 25 years old, and I do have a sense of what it's like to grow up in a place. So what I can do is write this as an attention getter for targeting you. Gossip is fun, it just is. Friends fraternize, cousins chat, tias talk, and all know they should not be doing so. Sir Eastland herself loves a good story, so she too loves to hear about the tea being spilled. So I've got my subject in there, because remember, an attention getter is going to connect the subject to the audience. And I've got these ideas about the audience. So if you guys are local, I know that you might have been exposed to a little bit of Spanish. So I have the S in there for those students of mine that speak Spanish. It just is. We've got very informal language for those of you who are under 25. Tea being spilled is also relatively more modern slang. And so that's also for the under 25. So the TS is for the Southwesterners and or the people who are exposed to Spanish. And the it just is and tea being spilled is for the audience, you guys. Because what the attention getters do is connect the audience to the subject. You're supposed to make the audience interested. All right, if you're working with somebody's sense of humor, it gives you a sense of whether you can make jokes or be playful with that person. Be very careful with sense of humor. It can be really dangerous. When it is good, it's really, really good. And when it's bad, it's disastrous. I don't know if you've ever had a joke land poorly or, God forbid, offend somebody, but when humor works, it's wonderful. And when it doesn't, it's real bad. So just be very, very careful when you use humor. So say I were writing a subject about we don't talk about Bruno still, and the audience is still you. So when I was collecting data, I thought about the sense of humor. In my experience of you guys, you seem to have a primarily playful sense of humor. So kind of, nice, playful, as opposed to vicious or cutting. And you tend, as a rule, you tend to have a more primarily formal or more conservative sense of humor. So I'm not going to be making a lot of very edgy or risky jokes because as a rule, you guys are playful and you're a little bit more formal. So if I were writing a so what, and I was thinking about the sense of humor and using that to target you, no one believes that you would kill someone's fish, and few believe you would make someone fat and or bald. Eastland herself is fairly positive that you would not interrupt a wedding. However, you almost definitely have had someone think something bad about you at one point. Maybe like Eastland and Bruno, you too have felt left out or misunderstood. It can be hard, but it can feel better to know that you are not the only one who has felt this way. Okay, so we're connecting the audience to the subject. I'm sorry, the subject to the audience. So we've got everything about our subject here. We've got Eastland, we've got Bruno. We also are referencing things for the sense of humor. So if you're looking at no one believes that you and few believe and is fairly positive, I'm being a little playful here. I'm teasing you and pretending that you are Bruno and that you didn't kill someone fish and you didn't make someone fat or bald. So I'm being a little playful with these first parts. And then I had someone think something bad about you at one point, because as a rule, everyone, this is a pretty easy one, but everyone, especially students, have had someone think something bad about you at one point. The other element that I added for audience is that it can be hard, but it can feel better to know you're not the only one who has felt that way. That part was for the under 25, because often the older you get, the more you recognize that your drama is not your drama. It is the similar drama to other people's dramas. So I even got a 25-year-old thing in there. And I have the topic in there because you want to connect the audience to the subject and or the topic. And that's what I did. I connected the subject to the audience's life and or the topic. So at this point, I'm telling you, why do you care about my essay? Why do you care about my subject? You care because it can feel better to know that you're not the only one who has felt that way. That is me answering, so what? I had to build up to that sentence, well, that half of the sentence, but that's the so what. Okay, so let's talk about the audience. Since you guys are students, I can talk about student-teacher experiences because you're a student, which means you understand how you've experienced having somebody having power over you, because that's the student-teacher relationship. That's the power dynamic at play there. And when you're talking about the so what itself, so why would the audience care about this? It's because both Bruno and I would hopefully tell you not to hang on to that. We would hopefully have you guys let it go to reference Frozen and as a remarkably good piece of advice. Because when you are writing your so what, you are connecting the subject back to the audience's life. All right, so you got to tell them why they care. So what? So why do they care? Another thing you can use to figure out how to target your audience is to think about the things that that person talks about. Because if they talk about it, they probably are willing to talk about it. And if they don't talk about it, they might not be willing to talk about it. So what you really want to do is use the ideas that they discuss and avoid the ideas that they don't. So if we are still talking about the same subject and we still have you guys as the same audience, and I'm thinking about the type of things that my students talk about, a lot of you talk about having a close and extensive family. I hear about that a lot in exit passes and in both Essay 1 and now Essay 2. I also hear a lot about you guys being exposed to Latino music and to music in general. So I've heard you guys talk about those things, which means that you're at least a little familiar with those ideas. So when you're writing a background, you're providing the information to the audience that they don't have, but they need to understand in order to understand the subject. because remember, the background comes right before the thesis. So this is your last chance to prepare your audience for your subject in your thesis. So here's a background. When Eastland was a child, she grew up partially at her grandmother's house, exposing her to the kind of music and language used in We Don't Talk About Bruno. Okay, so remember, you're preparing your audience for your subject. So there's all the basic parts of my subject. That's not really stuff I need to prepare you for because you know who I am and we've played the song We Don't Talk About Bruno in class. So I don't really need to prepare you for that part. What I need to prepare you for is this grew up partially at her grandmother's house, because all three of my topics have to do directly or indirectly with me growing up at my grandmother's house. Because the entire subject about We Don't Talk About Bruno, all of that is affected by me growing up at my grandmother's house. So that is one thing you needed to know in order to understand my subject. I'm also tagging in a couple of my topics as sort of a preview so that when you get to those topic sentences, they'll make sense. Because I'm talking about my grandmother and my grandmother's type of music. Now, this whole when Eastland was a child, she grew up partially at her grandmother's house. Now, thinking about the kind of things you guys talked about, I'm not explaining why I grew up at my grandmother's house because a lot of you have large and extended families, so someone growing up at a family member's house wouldn't be necessarily very strange to you, so I didn't need to explain that. I didn't need to explain about listening to music when you're growing up because a lot of you guys have talked about listening to music when you were growing up. So when we think about the background and we're thinking about what you need to prepare the audience for and what you don't need to prepare the audience for, one of the things you think about is what they talk about. You guys talk about family, you guys talk about music, so I don't need to explain those things. All I need to do is give you the heads up that I partially grew up at my grandmother's house. Because a background explains the subject to the audience.